You have touched a quite most important yet the most ignored one. Because most of the time, especially when we talk about men, they usually tends to ignore such kind of things because
Mm,
of the society fears, because they don't want to labeled as, XYZ. So, and plus they don't have anyone to talk to about, and they don't have anyone, to share such kind of things where they have gone through all that kind of stuff and all that kind of, mental health illness and all that. It just piles up, piles up, piles up.
it piles up.
And so, Doug, for anyone, who's listening right now and who can, totally relate to that and who's going through such kind of phase, who's going through
Mm,
such kind of, anxiety, depression, all that kind of stuff, but
mhm.
you don't know where to start. So for those group of people, for those set of people, from where they should start.
It's a great question, Atif.
Oftentimes, when someone is going through such kind of things, oftentimes they feel really hard to open up,
Mm,
but they don't even know what are the, consequences of that.
yes.
So what do you suggest to those, or how do you think such kind of thing, or not opening up, or piling up the things after they can cause such type of drastic effect in your life?
Find a phrase that is a beginning phrase that primes the pump for writing something. This is an exercise that was given to me by one of my therapists. And you can have a phrase like, when I think about my father, dot, 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 or something like that. Um, and then uh, start with the phrase. So if it's somebody that's printing it out on paper, write that out. When I think about my father, and then just start writing and don't stop. Just write. But what you do is you're trying to write in some ways unconsciously. You're just trying to write and you don't stop. And when you do stop, start again. And you start again with that phrase. You don't have to rewrite when I think about my father, but you just keep writing. And what happens is when you let go and kind of surrender to that process, it's incredible. Sometimes what shows up more so than if you sat down and tried to write uh, a a piece that was going to be read by people. This is trying to get beyond the control mechanisms that we all have inside of ourselves.
I just want to, touch a very important question. And it might be uncomfortable for, for someone, but we often say that, the hardest conversations leads to the best outcome. So I think we need to have those conversations. Hi Doug, how are you doing? Thanks for being on the show.
Atif, I appreciate it. I appreciate your invitation. I've been looking forward to this.
Absolutely, absolutely, it's my pleasure. And Doug, where should we start? It's a whole deep topic, man. what
It's a
happened
deep,
with
deep topic.
what happened with the modern man?
Oh, goodness, with the modern man. Oh, where should we start? Well, on a daily basis, at least 5 days a week, I provide men's therapeutic guidance or therapeutic guidance for men. I've been in practice as a psychotherapist for over 35 years, and I recently, within the last 6 months, shifted to a coaching business model. And there's two reasons for that. Active number one was I was only licensed in the state of Washington, and so I couldn't work with clients outside of the
Mhm.
state. Um, there's no hard and fast rules really against that, but ethically, it's you're supposed to only work as a clinical therapist in the state where you're certified and licensed. And and I was getting requests from other states and even international requests. Um, so that's predominantly why I shifted to the coaching model. So essentially, my work is the same as it was before, but I really help men identify first to feel that they can trust the relationship with me, and then I create a safe container for them. And what I mean by safety, and all my work is virtual, the way I'm meeting with you.
Hmm.
Goodness, for 30 plus years, I met inside of four walls. And then with COVID and everything, that shifted the business model. And I was the therapist, by the way, that back when people were doing some therapy, psychotherapy, by phone. I thought, no, 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 you can't do that. You have to be in the room. You have to physically be with a human being. And that still has, I think, I don't know if it has greater value. Um, but I learned quickly that the virtual work is extremely efficient. And one thing it does do, well, it does many things, but one thing it does is just the convenience factor.
Yes.
People don't have to fight to get to your office back when people would physically come to see me. And people feel comfortable in their own spaces. And so now people, uh, men connect with me while they're sitting on in their car on their lunch break. They'll find a safe place, confidential place within the business place. And then, of course, so many people work from home. But back to, I create that container is what we refer to it as a safe space. And what I mean by safe is not that it's always going to be easy,
Yes.
but safe is that it's trusted. And it's in that space. I really help men process their earlier life, many times the early childhood trauma. And it doesn't have to be early childhood, but usually that's the seed bed where things really get shifted in the way people think and feel about themselves in those early developmental years. So
Hmm.
uh, I often think of myself as, and I have an undergraduate degree in agriculture, which shocks most people, and every once in a while it kind of shocks me, to be honest with you. But that was in a former life. A long time ago. But I think sometimes as a farmer, I think about a person's life as acreage. It's like, well, we're going to work on one part of the farm today. We'll work in this field, and tomorrow maybe we'll work in another field. But so I think of in agricultural terms, they'll refer to it as the back 40, and the back 40 is just a general term for a field way off uh, the hard road, if you will. I'm from Kentucky originally, from the South, and they talk about dirt roads, gravel roads, and hard roads, and that's the paved road. So that back 40 is those fields that are kind of way off in yonder land, and that I think of that as we have to go back and look at some of those early wounds, and then we look at what's going on right now in the present and helping men really get present to their lives because most of us, men and women, work at such a fast pace. So um, I'm kind of a fast person by nature. I like to talk. You can probably tell that.
Hmm.
And I'll say and talk a lot, but really in my work, I slow things down. I slow down. I've learned the rhythm of that. I've done a lot of therapy where I've been the client. I've done a lot of that work. And probably the best work I've ever done is with therapists who, well, clearly are not anxious in the session. And I don't show up with anxiety in the
Hmm.
session. I really set just a good space to be able to do the work. And so that's what I do day in, day out. And I like to do these podcasts, and I'm always open to new business. There's always some room in my schedule. So, yeah, so that maybe is a good way to get it started.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you have touched a quite most important yet the most ignored one, because most of the time, especially when we talk about men, they usually tends to ignore such kind of things because of the society fears, because they don't want to labeled as XYZ. So, and plus they don't have anyone to talk to about, and they don't have anyone to share such kind of things where they have gone through all that kind of stuff. and all that kind of, mental health illness and all that, it just piles up, piles up, piles up.
It piles up.
And so, Doug, for anyone, who's listening right now and who can, totally relate to that, and who's going through such kind of phase, who's going through
Mm-hmm.
such kind of, anxiety, depression, all that kind of stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
you don't know where to start. So for those group of people, for those set of people, from where they should start.
It's a great question, Atif. Um, I find that a lot of people have already started the process once they find me or find some people helper. So goodness, the online resources are amazing. It can be quite overwhelming. So I find that most people have read something or they've had somebody in their life that suggested to them, you need to speak with somebody. And
Hmm.
yes, that's quite a hurdle for most men. I mean, it was for me. I mean, I look back, I spoke of being an undergraduate agriculture major. Goodness, I was 20 some years old. And I had hit a few walls before then in my adolescence. Um, and I hit a real hard wall, both psychologically and emotionally. And I didn't know what was going on for me, but it was very, very scary. And the somebody referred me to a therapist. This is back in this would have been in the mid 80s. Um, I had a job right out of college and did a 2 year agricultural teaching agriculture at the secondary level in high school. Things fell apart for me and I moved back home and somebody had referred me to go see a therapist. So I drove 2 hours to go see this therapist and I'll never forget it. It's as if I'm there right now. I got there maybe 15 minutes early. And this is way before cell phones, right? So I don't know how in the world we got around back then with maps and writing down directions. We did it, but we sure didn't have any navigation on a phone. And so I show up at the office, and I remember going into the bathroom, um, and I thought I was going to throw up. I mean, I was so nervous. I had never sat with anybody, and I
Hmm.
knew the things that I wanted to talk about. Um, and I didn't really even know where to start. So I think the thought sometimes of even meeting with somebody, a man will want to, but it's so overwhelming. And so many people, when I have the first session with them, and sometimes even subsequent sessions, but the first session is often, I don't know where to start. I don't know where to start.
Yeah.
And my response to that is take your time and know that wherever you start, uh, we'll get home. We'll get to the right place. And it might not even feel like that today in our first time together, but just trust that we will get there. And often I think that creates a kind of a sense of not so much stress because you've got most people have that perfection thing going on. I've got to make sure that I say it just the right way and I got to make sure that I'm understood and all of that. And I have those kind of voices within me as well. Um, so most of the time I'm not sure this is the best word to use, Atif, but it's easier to be the provider than it is to be the one on the other side of the room or on the other side of the screen because the vulnerability factor of just opening up. And I think sometimes there's that subconscious fear of if I open this up, even to myself as the client, I don't know where this is going to go. So, yeah, I've got this. Uh, Need to speak to somebody and I've got this symptomology that's extremely problematic, but I've got a tight wrap kind of on how I've held this. And so there's a surrendering factor to putting words to it. Um, and I didn't learn that in a textbook. I've learned that through my own life, my own lived life. So I get that. I get that. And I don't think every therapist or coach gets that. I think that sometimes there's kind of a rushing to get to the point, or there's a lot of teaching initially. When I go to the doctor, I like to first be examined before somebody's going to suggest any kind of treatment.
Yes.
So I often think of the
Mm.
old stethoscope, and I went to see a primary care doctor recently. I'm well into my 60s and I'm on Medicare, and it's tough to find a primary care doctor these days because of
Mm.
COVID. Um, and also, it doesn't pay much if you're a family physician, at least here in the States, and usually an overwhelmed caseload. But I was really encouraged because when she walked into the room, uh, she had around her neck a stethoscope. And I liked that because I thought she's going to listen to my heart and my lungs. And I often feel in my work that I work with an invisible stethoscope and I listen. Again, I love to talk, but I listen well. I listen intentionally to the way words are phrased. I listen to repeated phrases that often tell me and give me a sense of, okay, something's being said here and something's being emphasized here. So I often will reflect back to a client. You've said 3 or 4 times this word or this phrase, or you've emphasized this, or I saw a lot of emotion in you at this point. So
Mm.
that's just an observation. And what we're really trying to do is not only promote the interrelatedness and connectedness in a relationship, but also helping an individual get more attuned to the observer inside of them. Where's the observer inside of you? And how does that see you? So I will help men and we'll do some exercises so they can really look at themselves. They're living their life as we all
Yes.
do, but many times we're not conscious of living our life. We're just living our life and we're feeling our feelings and we're thinking our thoughts, but we don't take time or know how to get some distance to say, what is that thought pattern I have? And what feelings does that promote in me? And then why do I have these intrusive thoughts? And why do I think so much about my father who's been gone for a while, or we're estranged, or we're even in a close relationship? And I'm 42 years old and I work in a corporate setting, but I think about my dad a lot. I'm saying that often. And so we just look at the kind of the mystery of that. And I've had men say, I think about my father a lot, but I don't think about my mother much at all. And I feel guilty about that. It's like,
Mm.
well, let's explore that. Tell me about your mother. Tell me about your relationship with your mother. I always want to know, where are you from and who'd you grow up with? I mean, if
Yes.
somebody said, Doug, you can't ask those questions, but you can try to help somebody, I would say literally. I that would be like a runner running with uh well, that's not a good metaphor or not a good literal story about somebody running with one leg because people actually do it.
Mm.
Um, but that would be, I would feel so blind in that work to not be able to help. I have to know where you're from, what have your life experiences been, and where do you want to go?
Yeah.
Where do you want to go and who do you want to be? Sometimes we'll say things like, if you were in another life, who would you be? And it's interesting just to watch the left brain and right brain, to watch somebody's right brain begin to imagine a life. And so people will kind of riff on. And then they'll realize, actually, I'm not just making up a story. That's the life that I want to live. I love those moments. Those are aha moments. Those are beautiful moments. So that's the work. And I hope I answered your question. I probably went further than your question even set me up for, but
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, to start the journey, first you have to sit down and you have to analyze where it's all coming from.
yeah,
And then you need to go from that onwards.
yeah.
Totally, totally get it. And oftentimes when someone is going through such kind of things, oftentimes they feel really hard to open up,
Mm,
or they don't even know what are the consequences of that.
yes.
So what do you suggest to those, or how do you think such kind of thing, or not opening up, or piling up the things after them, can cause such type of drastic effect in your life?
Mhm, mhm.
What is the the catastrophe in your life?
I'm thinking of because some of the things I've been talking about this morning
Mm,
have been a bit abstract. Let me give you an example of one of the exercises that we do. This is just coming to mind, and I think this will help. It's something that even the listeners could begin to do. And it sure doesn't mean they have to end up meeting with me or some other provider. They might just be able to find their own way
mm,
in their own life. Um, I think that's kind of a rarity because, if you're going to go and if I'm going to go and let's say to the Himalayan mountains, I don't want to go alone, and I would love a Sherpa to help guide me. And so I refer to myself as a therapeutic guidance coach. I've shifted to that coaching model. And for people that would get that term of being a Sherpa, I say to them when they say, "Well, who are you going to be in my life?" Or because coaching is an interesting word. A lot of us have not had all that many great experiences with prior coaches. I mean, I've had some good coaches in my athletic life a while ago, and I had some really poor coaches. So
mm,
this coaching word many times needs to be unpacked. So I shift away from because coaching sometimes denotes I'm going to tell you what to do. You're going to become my pupil. You're going to become my student.
mm,
And it does have that component to it. But I love the concept of a Sherpa. And that's just somebody who comes alongside and guides you and knows that they can't do their work unless there's a trusted connection as we try to scale the mountain. Back to this exercise. Right now, what people could do within the next 24 hours, sit down with a piece of paper. You can do this on a keyboard, but it's better to do with your own handwriting. Now, I want to be sensitive to that. I've got a little bit of kind of a dyslexic type of thing that goes on for me neurologically. And it's not that I read, most people hear dyslexia and they think, well, you read backwards or words jumble themselves up.
mm,
That doesn't happen to me. Mine is, and there's a term for it and it escapes me right now, that it's very difficult for me to print or cursively write. And as a young boy, I can remember in the fifth grade one day, but I'm sure this happened more than once. We were called up to the chalkboard back in the days of chalkboards.
mm,
And I was asked to write something on the board, and the teacher was in the back of the room, and I was paralyzed. I just literally was just paralyzed, and I tried, and things didn't come out right. And then we all know that your friends, even your friends, or your enemies in class, they laugh at you and whatever. But it really became a lot of social anxiety for me. But that's about a challenge about handwriting. So uh, for example, I wrote a book and I tried to do some freehand writing. Uh, my wife's an author and she does things with a notepad and whatever. It doesn't mean she doesn't use a keyboard. I had to do all of my writing on a keyboard. So, anyways, back to the exercise. Find a phrase that is a beginning phrase that primes the pump for writing something. This is an exercise that was given to me by one of my therapists. And you can have a phrase like, when I think about my father, dot, 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 or something like that. Um, and then uh, start with the phrase. So if it's somebody that's printing it out on paper, write that out. When I think about my father, and then just start writing and don't stop. Just write. And then when you do stop, because we all do, because we begin to look at the grammar or we say, we don't like the way we wrote that, especially those of us like myself who have these perfectionistic tendencies. It's like,
mm,
wow, if somebody were to read this, they wouldn't like it, so I stop and whatever. But what you do is you're trying to write in some ways unconsciously. You're just trying to write and you don't stop. And when you do stop, start again. And you start again with that phrase. You don't have to rewrite when I think about my father. but you just keep writing. And what happens is when you let go and kind of surrender to that process, it's incredible. Sometimes what shows up, more so than if you sat down and tried to write uh, a, a piece that was going to be read by people. This is trying to get beyond the control mechanisms that we all have inside of ourselves. And so when I began doing this exercise, the first time I did it with a therapist, I was doing some intensive work with him, and I was there for a weekend. And he gave me this exercise. This is the last thing on the first day.
Mhm.
And when I went home, I did it, and it was incredible. I was shocked by what came out of me. I couldn't stop writing. I thought I would write for maybe 3 or 4 sentences. So what I thought I would say, I did say, and then I said a lot more. So when I came in the next morning, um, I said, I've got a long piece to read to you. I mean, that I thought it was going to be 30 seconds of reading something to you. And he's like, well, something broke free in you. So please read it. He had me do another exercise, by the way. He had me sketch something. This was like on the second day of our work together. And that night I was to sketch something that was representing some of the work that we were doing. And I sketched something. I don't have any artistic talents.
Mhm.
So I sketched something and then I didn't like it. So I sketched a second sketch. So when I went in and sat down with a therapist, he said, were you able to complete the exercise? And I said, yeah. And I showed him the first sketch. And then I said, let me show you my second sketch. And I was so proud of the second sketch. And he looked at him and said, the first one is authentic.
Mhm.
The second one is made up. And it so shocked me.
Perfect.
Yeah, perfect. It so shocked me. Not because I was an artist, but it helped me understand the lens that I look at and how distrusting I am sometimes of just what comes. And so he said, you tried to make it better, didn't you? And we chuckled. And I said, yeah, I really wanted it to look really good. And he said, it actually, it doesn't speak of authenticity. And then we
So,
worked with the piece. It was beautiful, really simple exercises. So back to that writing exercise, just start with whatever phrase kind of primes the pump, possibly something you've been wrestling with, struggling with, something you want in your life. Maybe it's some of your anxiety. Um, it could be anything, really. It doesn't even have to be anything that's pertinent to the work. Um, I often, when I think of these things, I think of my beloved dog Chester, and it could start with, I love my dog Chester. And who
mhm.
knows what that might open up about what it means for me to love and what I want from Chester and love back. So just those kind of things open up the possibilities to think and feel differently. And that's really what people are searching for is something new and something fresh, as opposed to all the ruminations that we do, just all of the ruminations that we do habitually that we don't even really know, A, how much we do it, and B, the extent of suffering that we create for ourselves, because we really do perpetuate a lot of our own suffering. I wasn't able to say that years ago because what I heard in that was that you're doing it to yourself, and so yourself is to blame. But I've shifted that now because when I say that we perpetuate our suffering, I've shifted it to I actually create much of my own suffering, but it's not my fault. It's not something I'm intentionally doing, but I am doing it, and I have to find a way to suspend that long enough to see what it's doing to me. So it shifts it out of, because again, I used to hear that as, well, I don't want people to blame themselves. I'm trying to help people not blame themselves. So we
Mhm.
shift to, could you be perpetuating your own suffering and you're not intentionally doing it? And then we begin to explore that. So it's like an onion peeling back, and you have these aha experiences that many times can shift somebody's depression, that all of a sudden they experience something new. And it shifts and they can feel the energy in their body, because depression many times mutes the experience of even being in touch with your body. So what a what a what an honor it is to do this work. It's so
Absolutely.
important. It's just so important. So back to if somebody wants to kind of crack the egg and make a phone call or reach out to a therapist and even or a coach and even just ask for could we do a consultation to see if the fit is good. And if people don't do that, I require a consultation to make sure that the fit is good on for both individuals
Hmm.
because it's something you don't want it to fail because the fit wasn't good. Yeah. And sometimes you don't know, but I think typically people kind of know, and I typically know if I've got what it takes to be of help to this person, and if not, um, I get a lot of excitement out of making a good referral. I'm making a referral today, and somebody reached out to me with a 22-year-old family member who's self-harming. And I just don't have room for that on my schedule right now, but I've got a list of individuals that I can make a referral. And so in my mind, I imagine this 22-year-old young man who's um, got some self-harm going on. He's going to get some help. He's going to get some help, and that makes me happy.
Absolutely, absolutely. And actually, you have opened up quite, important topics, and this is really important when you write down your stuff. Then you come to know about such things which you don't know yet. You come to know about where you are lacking from, where that lack is, and you come to know a different kind of perspective where that hollowness is, where what's the gap you were trying to fill all your life by doing xyz activities, but instead of tending to that gap, you know you tend
Great
to
way to
just
think about it.
ignore that. Absolutely. And regarding this, there is one more thing which just came to my mind, which I've seen someone who's struggling with this kind of journaling, and he's just so afraid that if I start to do journaling, then it might trigger some points. It might trigger some thought patterns, some deep down traumas, childhood traumas. It might trigger. So how can he deal with that kind of thing?
Mm, mm. I don't have a simple answer for that one
Mm,
because that's just a real fear.
yeah.
Um, I if somebody were, well, I have two thoughts. Tiff, number one is I want to encourage listeners, and I often do this with clients. Journaling doesn't work for some people.
Mm,
Um, Writing things down at different times and doing kind of one-off exercises works for some people, but some people journal every day. They journal on, and for some people, I'm one of those. I've tried to journal. I can't tell you how many empty journals I own. And I often thought if I get a really cool looking one, like I get a leather bound journal, uh, I'll write in that one. It's like, no, that's not the issue. Um, so I often think of if we can encourage somebody to do a writing exercise and not maybe take on the heavy lifting of journaling. I think most people um, are already journaling that are going to journal. They might learn about it in this kind of work. I do those one-off exercises, and if it promotes journaling, great.
mm,
Now getting into the real meat of your question. I talk a lot about, and I've seen it in my own life, I talk a lot about the resistance that shows up. And so, for example, if somebody were to say to me what you just said, hey, Doug, I want to do that exercise, or I want to start journaling, let's say, but yeah, I'm so afraid of it. I'm so
mm,
afraid of what it's going to bring up. Um, so the way I would typically approach that is let's look at what the resistance is about, as opposed to trying to sell them on, no, you really need to do it, and um, don't be afraid. You know, you, I would use words like really respect the resistance. We want to explore what the resistance is about. So then the work becomes back to that onion being peeled. Now we look at the resistance in you. I've been working with a client who has wanted to start writing a book and actually has the chops to do it. But it's so, I mean, literally every time this individual gets to the door of really beginning to write, everything shuts down. So I don't know what that's about on the front end. They don't know what it's about. And I love what you said earlier that you have to analyze it to figure out what is this about. So then we make the work about what's this resistance about.
Mm.
This past week, I had a client who uh, got a book um, about narcissism regarding one of their family members. They wanted to read about narcissism because they see some really strong narcissistic tendencies to the point of it being a narcissistic personality disorder, as opposed to just selfishness, let's say, which we all have.
Mm.
It would be a formal diagnosis. The individual got the book. They've had it now for probably 2 weeks and can't crack it open. So then we just made that the focus. I didn't um, re-give him the instructions or maybe a little bit of advice to, well, try to read for a minute or two and, don't overwhelm yourself with having to read even the first chapter. But that didn't work. He just said, I can't pick the book up and open it. Now, I also know that to your point earlier, um, there must be somewhere inside of his consciousness that I don't know, and I don't want to imagine that I know what this is about, but we can do some guesswork. Yeah, it's going to bring up some things that are going to be painful, uncomfortable. He's already explored so much of that in his relationship with his family member. It could be that it's going to give confirmation to what he has suspected about narcissism, which really might push the issue of, can I even be in a relationship with this person?
Mm.
Uh, it's one thing to be thinking about that, but to make that decision with a parent is one hell of a decision. So, and it's one I know this individual would not want to make, but might have to for the sake of himself and his family, because of how problematic this other individual is. So, um, yeah, we just are exploring the resistance. But then sometimes the resistance is just about doing creative projects like writing a book or getting started. And so then we ask, well, where does resistance come from? Does resistance reside just within the person, or is there some outside force that seems to work against us? And, in the wisdom literature, and when you talk to individuals who've been doing deep work with people for a while, be it they're, somebody in the second half of their life, and they're what I would refer to in the Jungian terms is they're a sage. They have definitely gotten to a place of being a wisdom carrier. Many of those people um, believe or know that there's outside forces that are against creativity
Mm.
and new possibility. And, everybody that subscribes to that will have different language that they'll use. But it is this resistance that doesn't just reside within the person's psyche. It's something outside that's not wanting them to go forth. Um, I don't claim that I understand that, um, but I know it's real. I know it's real. And so that's a very important thing to identify. Is this just within me, or is this some outside force? And, some people, that's a very uncomfortable topic for some
Absolutely.
people. Very
Absolutely.
uncomfortable. They would
Yeah.
they would much rather just be it resides within people, but it's like, oh, there's an outside force, there's a predatorial force. No, no, that's weird. I don't want to talk about that. So, um, I was on a podcast yesterday. I run a podcast, and I had two guests on. I typically will have one. Like seems like maybe that's your rhythm.
Hmm.
Every once in a while, we'll do what's called a round table, and I'll have more than one person. And I had two people on. And I tell you what, within 5 minutes, both of these women are in their 80s, and they are wisdom carriers. They're wisdom carriers. They've been at this work a long time. I was so honored to be with them.
Hmm.
Written numerous books, just very wisdom carriers. Within 5 minutes, one of the guests is talking about, and not in some weird way. She's a historian by nature, um, but she said there are outside forces at work. Um, she used some very strong terms about evil, um, especially with, and we won't go into the whole realm of politics, but
Hmm.
even what's going on here in the States. Um, I am fine to say I, I am very troubled by what's going on here in the U.S. And it's interesting to get outside perspectives. Um,
Yeah.
very troubled about the chaos that is happening. Um, so, anyways, I was just I was I was going to say I was surprised, but I was I knew that within 5 minutes of the podcast we were talking about what we needed to be talking about because these are wisdom carriers and they've been around a long time. They've seen a lot of things that have happened in the world. So, anyways, um, it was a good time.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned, there might be some other, external factors involved in that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And sometimes, I talked a lot. Um I talked a lot of people, about this, and some of those, mentioned that they had some kind of past, traumatic experiences, and now they're entering into their new phase of life, but they are afraid because they have seen something going on within their family or their surroundings or around their circles, but they're afraid to enter into new relationship, into new, new
Mm.
settings. They might be afraid that it might happen to them, or what
We,
if this goes exactly like that. So how do you overcome that kind of fear?
oh boy, you're asking some very real and deep questions about fear. Um, I think it gets back to um, honoring the fear, respecting the fear, most of the time naming it as legitimate. I mean, there are those irrational fears, and I think that's important to be able to do whatever kind of work we can do around, okay, this
Hmm.
is an irrational fear when people say, I know this isn't going to happen, or I'm pretty sure it won't, but I still get, and those are, uh, those, in my mind, those are more about intrusive thoughts that just drop in. And people know it's like, I don't even think that way, or I don't feel that way, or that violates my convictions about my life and how I want to live my life. So that is to me defined as an intrusive thought. And then we work from that place. The other place is the legitimate fear place. Um, and one of the things we talked about yesterday, and I think you and I might be talking on the edges of it, and that is there's a lot of fear right now in the world.
Hmm.
There's a lot of fear, and some might say there's a part of my brain that says, well, there's always been a lot of fear, so what's unique about now? Um, what's unique about now is I can only ground it in my life and my lived life. Um, I've never seen the pervasiveness of fear within people. So it speaks about, at least in this decade of time or in this century of time, were there prior fears and other times? Oh, hell yes. Absolutely. But this is the life I'm living now, and there's a lot of fear. I had a person say to me yesterday, um, that this person said in tears, I'm not a fearful person by nature. I don't live scared. So what's happening to me? They even said, I'm not a weak person by nature. I've endured a lot of tough times, but I'm really afraid. And they were crying while they were saying this. And I was just able to say your fear is legit. And this wasn't a client. This was actually a friend of mine. I said, your
Mhm.
fear is so legitimate.
Mm.
It's so legitimate. You're actually right now a conduit for the fear that so many people are feeling. Um, so back to what you said in your question, how do we deal with these fears? I think we first have to legitimize them and deal with reality, not the way we want it to be, not the way even it should be, but the way it is. And then find the strength, however we do, and there's resources to do that, to engage the reality of things and not have the fear dominate us because fear that dominates paralyzes people. I've been paralyzed at times by fear.
Mm.
And so somehow we have to resource the things in relationships and build community and be with people, not be alone with ourselves in dire times. I mean, who's ever really made it in hard times just by themselves?
Mm.
You have to lean into
Yeah.
your neighbors. I mean, we look at the fires in LA, the awful tragedy, but then to see the beauty of people coming together. I mean, I'm astounded by the human spirit and by the deep wells of giving that I believe we all have. And sometimes they've not been tapped. That water's not been tapped. But to watch people who would literally have their house burned down, lose everything, and be caring for their neighbor who also lost their house. I look at that and I'm just astounded by that. So, boy, we need each other. And we also need time in solitude. There's a phrase by one of my mentors. We all have mentors that we never met, and they're champions and teachers and esteemed human beings that maybe it was best that we never met them because if we met them, we might just somehow not see them as the grand human beings
Yeah,
they are.
absolutely,
You know,
absolutely.
you know what I
Yeah.
mean.
Yeah, absolutely.
Henry Nouwen. Wow, Henry, born in the Netherlands. A book I would recommend to anybody listening is especially if anybody's doing the type of work that I do, the book, The Wounded Healer. Wow, The Wounded Healer. What Henry proposes is you really can't help somebody unless you're in touch with your own brokenness. Um, and by being in touch with that, you can connect with another human being that's equally in turmoil. But he has a phrase that I love. The further the outward journey takes us, the deeper the inward journey must be.
Mm.
And so there you get that polarity, the juxtaposition of you reach out and you have to reach down. And I think that if you genuinely reach down in solitude and meditation and prayer and doing your own personal work, you then will reach forward.
Absolutely.
So, so there's this beautiful wedding and marriage of that. And that's one of the things we talked about yesterday a lot about is what does it mean to be in service to other people, but also be going deeper into your own self and doing your work. But there's just this mutuality of the further the outward journey takes us. And boy, if you don't do your inner work and you get too far out there, um, that's problematic because
Mm.
that's like a tree without roots. You're not rooted.
Mm.
So the further the outward journey takes us, the deeper the inward journey must be. So I think that's how we deal with our fear, and somehow we maybe wake up one day and we're not as afraid as we were. We realize, my goodness, something has shifted. Sometimes it shifts by doing the hard work and you see it right then. But if you do the work, you'll then one day maybe wake up to, and I've had these experiences and I've seen so many other people, you just wake up and you go, oh my gosh, something has happened. That work that
Yeah.
I've been doing, it's come to fruition. I'm not as afraid as I was. That's a beautiful thing to witness. We don't always see that immediacy, but you do the work. You do the work. You meet with somebody, you do these writing exercises, you spend time alone, you join in community of places that you feel like you can make a difference in the world.
Doug, you, previously you have, you have raised a very important point, the wounded healer.
Yes.
Because oftentimes, we see anyone, who's been the on the giving side, but that person has gone through so much by himself.
Mm,
And only then, if that person has gone through all that kind of stuff, he has fought his demons, he has fought his, all that inner struggles, battles, only then he can solve your whatever you are going through.
correct.
So absolutely, that's quite wonderful. And Doug, before we wrap this up, I
Yeah.
just wanna, touch a very important question. And it might be uncomfortable for, for someone, but we often say that the hardest conversations leads to the best outcome. So I think we need to have those conversations. So Doug, I'm sure you have a lot of clients as well, and you have deal with lots of clients. So what are the early symptoms, if someone is going through such things?
Mhm.
And we have seen that they are going through phase 1, phase 2, but they are being
Mm,
ignored, phase 3.
mm,
And the final step, they are thinking about taking their own life.
mm,
And finally they did that. And then
okay.
their friends and all their surrounding members, they might be wondering, man, he was so fine, what happened? We
Mhm.
never knew that. We never knew what
Mm,
was going on
mm,
in their head. So what are
mhm,
those early symptoms? If we know about that,
mhm.
it might prevent from someone taking this step.
I really appreciate the question. Thank you for going right to it. Two things come to mind. Number one is, what do we say to the person that's either listening right now or the listeners know somebody that they believe are on the cliff edge or showing symptoms.
Hmm.
I think the classic symptoms are pulling away from uh, relationships, isolating, um, sometimes delusional thinking and paranoid thinking and strange behaviors. I can point to, something's really not, this person's not well. Um, Even as they talk about their struggles, there's an irrationality to it. And many times paranoia can be in that, really living fearful in ways that when you hear them articulate it, you just go, this is really extremely irrational. Meaning there's no possible way somebody's following them around 24/7, literally.
Hmm.
Um, Now we know that, yeah, people get stalked and whatever, so I don't want to minimize that, but we know when we hear something, it's like, that's implausible, that's not possible, that's irrational. Those are some of the classic symptoms. The only thing we can do if somebody is listening or we're trying to help somebody help themselves, um, is that there's that you plead with somebody. You just plead with somebody to get help. If somebody's listening right now, we plead with you to not take your life. We plead with you that um, there's a possibility for you to live a different life, to feel differently. Your suffering's real, um, and you will leave a wake of people behind you that will suffer immensely. And we often shy away from that because we don't want to guilt the person. But there's a way to say to them, people are going to hurt. And sometimes that'll I've seen it happen where that'll wake somebody up to, oh, so I have value. And also, I want to take my life, but I don't want to hurt my mother or I don't want to hurt my partner or whatever. But sometimes we know that doesn't work. Um, in my field, providers will do suicide contracts where there's a promise in the contract and essentially sign here and make a promise. Do those work? They're hit and miss. It doesn't mean it's a bad practice. It's a form of pleading.
Mm.
D No way guarantees anything.
Yeah.
And the second thing I'll tell you, and this would be a great place to stop. I have a dear friend, a colleague, who only works with people who are suicidal. She's been doing it for over 40 years. I had a family member take their own life, and I went to meet with her. And I wasn't meeting with her as a colleague. I was meeting with her as, Randy, I need your help. I sat in your training. I referred people to you. We've consulted on cases. I'm here because my brother took his life. Um, and what I learned in her training and what she reemphasized for me, and this is new, this will be new for most people. It doesn't mean it's not in the literature, but sometimes people don't know this. And that is that people that have had suicidal ideation, and we know about that. We know that people have talked about it. Let's say um, they've announced it, they've shared it in secret, sometimes have said it in kind of humorous ways, but we get a sense like, I think they're meaning something there.
Mm.
Always pursue it. Always pursue it. People say, well, I don't want to upset somebody, or I sure don't want to get somebody thinking about it. I mean, that's just a myth. Really, I mean, do it lovingly and supporting, being supportive, but really pursue it in confidence. You said this at the dinner table. You said this at the family reunion. You said this when we were hanging out. You said this on the golf course, whatever. Um, I want to ask you, what's going on? Were you actually making an announcement? But
Mm.
what I learned from Randy was many times people who are carrying these suicidal ideations, they will have an uptick in energy. Something will show up. And sometimes it's the thought about ending it because now there's an end in sight. And they will show up with a level of excitement. And people will say, "Wow, Billy was really doing well." And she
Yeah.
said, that's many times when they will take their own life because now they have the energy. I don't know a better way to describe it. Randy might put better words to it. But now they have the energy to actually go through with it. And that was a shock to me because many times we read that as Billy's doing better. You know,
Yeah.
Billy was, man, he was so talkative at the dinner table and he was talking about his future, so we all went to bed that night just going, man, something's really turned. And then the next day or 2 weeks later, Billy takes his own life and people are shocked. I get that. It's like, well, wait a second. I thought he was doing so great. So I learned that because she's worked in the trenches doing the work. I appreciate you
Mm.
asking that. It's sure pertinent to my story, and it's pertinent to so many stories. Um, it's been good to be with you today. I again want to thank you, and I hope we can stay in touch. People can find me. You can find me at dougasguide.com. That's DOUGASGUIDE, dougasguide.com. And there it explains my coaching practice and my availability. People can reach out to me. We can set up a short consult if need be.
Absolutely, absolutely, man. It's totally my honor, and totally love the whole conversation, and definitely gonna have you again and again. We have so much to talk about.
Oh, I would love to be back on. Let's do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks again for
Thank
being
you.
on the show.
Bless you. Thank you.
Take care.
I'm
Bye bye.
grateful. I'm
Bye bye.
grateful. Bye bye.